Rising tensions and the biggest air power surge since 2003. In early 2026, global military watchers began tracking a major shift in American air deployments across the Middle East, a shift that many analysts are describing as the largest U.S. air power buildup in the region since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Satellite imagery and open-source tracking show a surge of advanced stealth fighters, refueling tankers, airborne warning aircraft, and tactical jets moving closer to potential conflict zones as diplomatic pressure with Iran reaches a boiling point. A defining feature of this buildup has been the mass movement of fifth-generation fighter jets, particularly F-35 Lightning II and F-22 Raptor aircraft, toward bases in the Middle East. Reports from military flight trackers and defense correspondents show large numbers of F-35A fighters departing from airfields like RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom and transiting through European airspace en route to Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and surrounding countries. Combined with existing assets already in place, estimates of deployed fighter aircraft at key locations have climbed well into the dozens in a matter of weeks. These fifth-generation jets are among the most advanced combat aircraft ever fielded. The F-35 Lightning II, with its stealth profile and integrated sensor suite, excels at deep strike missions and networked battlefield awareness, making it a powerful deterrent and first strike platform. The F-22 Raptor, designed for air superiority and stealth, remains one of the U.S. Air Force's premier fighters for controlling contested skies. Their presence in greater numbers so close to Iranian airspace has not gone unnoticed by Tehran. This strategic buildup is accompanied by other major assets. Command and control aircraft, such as the E-3 Sentry AWACS, aerial refueling tankers, and electronic warfare platforms, are moving to staging bases, creating a multi-layered aerial posture capable of sustained operations. According to military analysts, the concentration of these forces, including tankers that extend the fighter's range and AWACS that coordinate airspace control, marks a level of readiness rarely seen outside of active combat theaters. In parallel, naval power has also surged. 2 U.S. aircraft carriers, long a symbol of American military reach, are operating in or near the region, further expanding the air assets available for both deterrence missions and, if ordered, offensive action. Their air wings, which typically include carrier-based fighters like the F-35C variant and F-A-18 Super Hornets, add to the overall scale of the deployment. For Iran's leadership, the sight of stealth fighters and support aircraft massing at nearby bases is more than a symbolic gesture. Officials in Tehran have publicly warned against any perceived aggression, stating their willingness to respond decisively if their nation is attacked. Meanwhile, Washington insists that diplomacy remains its preferred path forward, though officials acknowledge that significant gaps in negotiations, especially around Iran's nuclear program, have so far prevented a breakthrough. This tense mix of diplomacy and military pressure, the largest concentration of air power and naval strength in the Middle East in more than 2 decades, sets the stage for a dramatic chapter in modern geopolitics. What once began as routine rotations of aircraft has evolved into a sustained, high-visibility posture that signals serious strategic intent, even as both sides publicly maintain that they do not want war. Iran's response: scrambling defenses in the shadow of stealth. As the surge of American air power into the Middle East accelerated, Tehran faced a moment of strategic calculation unlike any it had experienced in years. The arrival of F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning IIs was not just another military rotation, it was a visible message. Fifth-generation stealth aircraft are not deployed in large numbers without purpose. Their presence alone reshapes the psychological battlefield. For Iran's military leadership, the question was no longer whether tensions were rising, but how far Washington was prepared to go, and how quickly events could spiral beyond control. Iran's first response was not loud or theatrical. It was measured, deliberate, and deeply rooted in its long-standing defensive doctrine. Unlike conventional powers that rely heavily on advanced air forces, Iran has spent decades building a layered defense system designed specifically to counter technologically superior adversaries. Since the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, Tehran has operated under the assumption that any future conflict would involve overwhelming Western air power. As a result, it invested heavily in missile forces, air defense systems, underground facilities, and asymmetric warfare capabilities. Now, with stealth aircraft operating closer to its borders than at any time in recent memory, those preparations were being tested in real time. Reports from regional observers indicated that Iran began increasing the readiness levels of its integrated air defense network. Radar systems were activated at higher frequencies, surface-to-air missile batteries were repositioned, mobile launchers capable of moving quickly to avoid detection were dispersed across key regions. Iran's domestically produced Bavar 373 system, often compared by Iranian officials to advanced Russian systems, was placed on heightened alert. At the same time, older systems acquired from Russia and upgraded locally were integrated into overlapping defensive layers designed to complicate any potential air campaign. The challenge, however, was clear. The F-22 and F-35 are not ordinary fighter jets. They are built for precisely this type of scenario, penetrating dense air defense networks, gathering intelligence, striking high-value targets, and exiting before defenders can effectively respond. Their stealth profiles reduce radar visibility, while their advanced sensor fusion allows pilots to detect threats long before being detected themselves. For Iranian planners, the presence of these aircraft meant that traditional defensive assumptions had to be reconsidered. Radar alone would not be enough, reaction time would be critical, communication networks had to be secured against electronic warfare. Every command center understood that the first minutes of any confrontation could determine its outcome. But Tehran's response was not limited to defensive posturing. Iran also began signaling its own deterrent capabilities. State media broadcast footage of missile exercises, drone deployments, and naval maneuvers in the Persian Gulf. Ballistic missiles, long considered the backbone of Iran's strategic deterrent, were showcased as reminders that while Iran might not match American airpower plane for plane, it possessed tools capable of reaching regional bases, energy infrastructure, and maritime choke points. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Any strike would not go unanswered. In the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, activity intensified. Iranian fast attack craft increased patrols. Coastal defense systems were reportedly reviewed. The strait remains one of the most strategically vital waterways in the world, with a significant portion of global energy shipments passing through it daily. Iran has long viewed control of this choke point as leverage in times of crisis. Even without firing a single shot, heightened naval presence sends ripples through global markets. Oil prices react not only to war, but to the possibility of disruption. At the same time, Iran's leadership faced a delicate domestic balancing act. Public messaging had to project strength and readiness without triggering panic. Official statements emphasized sovereignty and deterrence, while avoiding language that could be interpreted as a declaration of imminent conflict. Iran's Supreme National Security Council convened multiple high-level meetings, assessing intelligence reports and evaluating the scale of the American buildup. Military commanders reportedly briefed political leaders on response options, ranging from diplomatic de-escalation to calibrated retaliation scenarios. Behind closed doors, the calculus was complex. Iran understands that a direct conventional confrontation with the United States would carry enormous risks. The memory of 2003, when American forces rapidly dismantled Iraqi defenses, still lingers in regional strategic thinking. However, Iran is not Iraq. Over the past 2 decades, it has studied American military doctrine in detail, analyzing operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. It has built redundancy into its command structure, hardened key facilities, and developed proxy networks across the region. These networks, in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, form part of what analysts often call Iran's forward defense strategy. Rather than waiting for conflict to reach its borders, Tehran maintains influence beyond them. As American aircraft filled regional skies, questions emerged about whether Iran might activate elements of this network as a form of indirect signaling. Increased rocket launches, drone activity, or militia movements could serve as calibrated responses without triggering full-scale war. Yet such actions would risk escalation. Each side was acutely aware that miscalculation, a radar lock misinterpreted, a drone shot down, a missile fired in warning, could ignite a chain reaction neither truly desired. Diplomatically, Iran also sought to shape international perception. Officials reached out to European partners, Russia and China, emphasizing that the American buildup threatened regional stability. Tehran framed itself as defending against intimidation rather than provoking conflict. This narrative battle matters. In modern geopolitics, perception can influence alliances, economic sanctions, and global opinion. If Iran could present the deployment as excessive or aggressive, it might gain diplomatic leverage. Yet inside Iran's military command centers, the tone was less rhetorical and more technical. Contingency plans were reviewed in detail. Air defense crews ran drills simulating stealth incursions. Cyber units assessed vulnerabilities in communications infrastructure. Satellite imagery was analyzed daily. Every tanker aircraft arriving in the region, every reconnaissance flight, every carrier movement was logged and studied. Information is power, and in this moment both sides were engaged in intense intelligence gathering. The scale suggested readiness for a sustained campaign if ordered. Iran's response therefore expanded beyond immediate air defense. Infrastructure resilience became a priority. Critical facilities were dispersed or concealed. Military aircraft were moved between bases. Underground complexes, a hallmark of Iran's defense strategy, provided additional layers of protection. For years, Iran has invested in hardened sites built into mountains or buried deep underground. These facilities are designed to withstand bombardment and preserve command continuity. Economically, the situation also carried weight. Markets react quickly to instability in the Middle East. Currency fluctuations, energy price volatility, and investor uncertainty all place pressure on governments. Iran, already navigating economic challenges from sanctions, had to ensure that heightened tensions did not trigger internal instability. Maintaining public confidence while preparing for worst-case scenarios required careful messaging and visible demonstrations of preparedness. As days passed and aircraft remained in theater, the psychological dimension intensified. Military buildups exert pressure precisely because they create uncertainty. Is this preparation for a strike, a deterrent display, a bargaining tool? Each possibility carries different implications. Iran's leadership had to interpret signals while avoiding overreaction. Acting too aggressively could justify escalation. Acting too passively could invite it. The broader region watched closely. Neighboring states, some hosting American assets, found themselves in sensitive positions. Hosting advanced aircraft enhances security ties, but also increases exposure in a crisis. Regional diplomacy accelerated quietly, with back-channel communications aimed at preventing misunderstandings. Even adversaries often maintain indirect lines of communication during tense periods, ensuring that red lines are understood. Ultimately, Iran's scramble was less about panic and more about posture. It was a demonstration that, despite overwhelming technological disparity, Tehran would not be caught unprepared. Air defenses were manned. Missile forces were ready, naval patrols increased, cyber units monitored networks, political leaders signaled resolve. The message, both domestic and international, was clear. Iran recognized the gravity of the deployment and would respond proportionally to any direct action. Yet beneath the surface of readiness lay a shared understanding between both sides. War in this region would not be contained easily. It would ripple outward, affecting global trade, energy markets, and regional stability. That awareness acted as both a restraint and a source of tension. Each additional aircraft landing in the Middle East added weight to the scales. Each defensive adjustment in Tehran signaled that the balance was shifting. As the largest American air deployment since 2003 took shape, Iran stood at a crossroads between deterrence and escalation. Its scramble was not chaotic, but calculated, not emotional, but strategic. The skies above the Middle East had grown crowded with advanced aircraft, and beneath them, layers of missiles, radars, and hardened facilities waited in silence. The world watched as two determined powers maneuvered in the shadows, each hoping to avoid the spark that could ignite something far larger than either publicly desired. The strategic chessboard, deterrence, power projection, and the risk of escalation. As American F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning IIs continued operating across the Middle East, and Iran maintained heightened defensive readiness, the crisis entered a more complex and dangerous phase, the phase where military deployments transform into strategic chess pieces. This was no longer just about aircraft numbers or missile batteries. It was about signaling, perception, timing, and the delicate balance between deterrence and provocation. Every major military buildup sends multiple messages at once. To adversaries, it signals capability and readiness. To allies, it signals commitment. To domestic audiences, it signals resolve. But in high-tension environments, signals can blur. A deterrent move can be interpreted as preparation for attack. A defensive mobilization can be viewed as escalation. In this environment, the margin for miscalculation becomes razor-thin. For Washington, the surge of stealth fighters into the region served several overlapping objectives. First, it reinforced deterrence. Fifth-generation aircraft are designed to dominate contested airspace. By deploying them in significant numbers, the United States demonstrated that it could rapidly achieve air superiority if required. Air superiority is the foundation of modern warfare. Without control of the skies, ground forces and infrastructure become vulnerable. The message was clear. Any aggressive move by Iran could be met with overwhelming force. Second, the deployment reassured regional allies. Many Middle Eastern states rely heavily on American security guarantees. The visible presence of advanced aircraft and supporting assets signaled that the United States remained committed to maintaining regional stability. In geopolitics, perception matters as much as capability. A visible show of strength can deter not only state adversaries, but also non-state actors who might exploit perceived weakness. Yet this show of force carried inherent risks. The more assets concentrated in a volatile region, the greater the chance of accidental encounters. Fighter jets operating in close proximity, naval vessels navigating narrow waterways, drones patrolling contested skies. Each interaction carries the possibility of misunderstanding. History has shown that crises often escalate not from deliberate decisions, but from unintended incidents. Iran, fully aware of these dynamics, adjusted its strategy accordingly. Rather than responding symmetrically, which would have been nearly impossible given the technological gap, Tehran emphasized asymmetric tools. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, cyber capabilities, and regional proxy networks formed the backbone of its deterrent posture. These capabilities are not designed to win a conventional air war. They are designed to impose costs. Cost imposition is central to modern deterrence theory. If a state cannot match its adversary weapon for weapon, it can instead threaten consequences in other domains. Iran's missile arsenal, capable of reaching regional bases and infrastructure, serves precisely this function. Its naval forces, particularly in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf, can complicate maritime operations. Its regional partnerships extend its reach beyond its borders. Together, these tools create layers of uncertainty for any potential attacker. Meanwhile, intelligence operations intensified on both sides. Surveillance aircraft mapped defensive networks. Satellites monitored troop movements. Electronic signals were intercepted and analyzed. Cyber units probed for vulnerabilities. In modern conflict preparation, information dominance can be as decisive as firepower. The side that understands the opponent's intentions first gains a critical advantage. The broader international community also played a role in shaping the crisis. Global powers with economic and strategic ties to the region monitored developments closely. Energy markets fluctuated with each new headline. Diplomatic channels, both public and private, remained active. Even during peak tension, adversaries often maintain indirect communication to prevent escalation. These back-channel discussions, though rarely visible, can be vital in clarifying red lines and intentions. At the heart of the situation lay a fundamental strategic paradox. Both sides sought to avoid war, yet both prepared intensely for it. Deterrence depends on credible readiness. However, credible readiness can look indistinguishable from preparation for attack. This paradox creates what strategists call the security dilemma. One side's defensive measures appear offensive to the other, prompting countermeasures that further increase tension. In this environment, time becomes a critical variable. Short-term deployments can signal temporary pressure. Long-term positioning can suggest strategic realignment. As days turned into weeks, analysts began asking whether this surge represented a transient crisis response or a more permanent shift in regional posture. A sustained presence of stealth aircraft would alter military calculations across the Middle East. Technological disparity added another layer to the strategic equation. The F-22 and F-35 are not simply faster or more maneuverable aircraft, they are integrated nodes in a networked battlefield. Sensor fusion, data sharing, and electronic warfare capabilities allow them to operate as part of a larger system. This network-centric warfare model amplifies their effectiveness. Iran's defenses, while extensive, were not designed around the same level of integration. This imbalance shapes planning on both sides. Yet, technology alone does not determine outcomes. Geography plays a decisive role. The Middle East's terrain, vast deserts, mountainous regions, dense urban areas, and narrow maritime corridors creates both opportunities and constraints. Iran's mountainous landscape provides natural defensive advantages. Underground facilities and dispersed infrastructure complicate targeting. Conversely, open desert terrain offers clear flight paths for advanced aircraft. Regional actors found themselves navigating a delicate balance. Some states welcomed the American presence as a stabilizing force. Others feared being drawn into confrontation. Hosting advanced military assets can enhance deterrence, but also increase vulnerability. Diplomatic efforts intensified quietly to ensure that regional tensions did not spill over into broader instability. The psychological dimension of the standoff cannot be overstated. Military power is not only about physical capability, but also about perception. Visible deployments influence morale, political discourse, and strategic confidence. For domestic audiences in both countries, narratives of strength and resolve shaped public opinion. Leaders had to project firmness without closing the door to de-escalation. Another critical factor was the memory of past conflicts. The year 2003 looms large in Middle Eastern strategic consciousness. The rapid collapse of Iraqi defenses after overwhelming air power remains a case study in modern military dominance. However, every conflict is unique. Iran's military structure, regional networks, and strategic doctrine differ significantly from Iraq's in 2003. Historical parallels inform but do not determine present outcomes. As the crisis evolved, analysts began to examine potential triggers for escalation. A missile test interpreted as preparation for attack. A drone intercepted near sensitive airspace. A naval encounter in the Strait of Hormuz. Cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure. Each scenario carried different escalation pathways. Crisis management depends on the ability to interpret events accurately and respond proportionally. At the same time, economic pressures acted as a moderating force. Global markets are deeply interconnected. Energy disruptions in the Middle East reverberate worldwide. Both Washington and Tehran understood that large-scale conflict would carry significant economic consequences, not only regionally, but globally. This shared awareness introduced an element of restraint, even amid intense military maneuvering. Behind the scenes, diplomatic options remained under discussion. Negotiations in geopolitics often proceed alongside military pressure. In fact, deployments can be used as leverage in talks. The presence of advanced aircraft might strengthen bargaining positions, signaling seriousness without requiring immediate action. Whether this surge was intended as coercive diplomacy or preparation for contingencies remained a subject of debate. As weeks passed, the situation resembled a high-stakes chess match. Each move prompted analysis. Each deployment triggered countermeasures. Yet neither side made the decisive move that would tip the balance into open conflict. Instead, both maintained readiness, calibrated rhetoric, and watched carefully. In many ways, this period highlighted the complexity of modern power projection. Military strength alone does not dictate outcomes. Strategy requires integration of diplomacy, intelligence, economic considerations, and psychological factors. The presence of F-22s and F-35s symbolized technological superiority, but the broader contest encompassed far more than aircraft. Ultimately, the crisis underscored a central truth of contemporary geopolitics. Deterrence is fragile. It depends on communication as much as capability. Misinterpretation can unravel carefully constructed stability. As stealth fighters patrolled Middle Eastern skies and Iranian defenses remained on alert, the world witnessed a tense equilibrium, a balance maintained not by trust, but by calculated restraint. The strategic chessboard remained set, pieces positioned carefully, neither side willing to make the irreversible move. Yet beneath the surface, calm readiness persisted. The largest air deployment in the region since 2003 had reshaped calculations, altered perceptions, and tested the resilience of deterrence in one of the world's most volatile theaters. The long game? What this deployment means for the future of the Middle East. As the surge of F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning IIs settled into a sustained presence across the Middle East, it became clear that this moment was not just about a temporary spike in tensions. It represented something larger, a recalibration of deterrence, a stress test of regional alliances, and a preview of how 21st century power projection will shape the future of one of the world's most volatile regions. Military buildups often dominate headlines in the short term, but their deeper impact unfolds gradually. The largest American air deployment in the Middle East since 2003 did more than shift aircraft across runways. It reshaped strategic thinking in Washington, Tehran, and capitals across the region. It forced governments to re-examine vulnerabilities, alliances, and long-term defense priorities. And, perhaps most importantly, it revealed how modern crises are increasingly fought in the gray space between war and peace. For the United States, this deployment reinforced a fundamental doctrine. Air dominance remains central to its global military strategy. The F-22 and F-35 are not merely tactical assets. They are strategic symbols. Their presence signals technological superiority, rapid response capability, and the ability to operate in contested environments. In a world where rivals are expanding advanced missile systems and air defenses, the ability to penetrate those defenses remains a cornerstone of deterrence. Yet this moment also exposed the limits of military power alone. Despite overwhelming technological advantages, Washington faced a familiar challenge: how to translate military strength into sustainable political outcomes. History has repeatedly shown that air superiority can win battles quickly, but long-term stability requires diplomacy, economic engagement, and regional cooperation. The events of 2003 demonstrated the speed of modern warfare, but they also revealed the complexity of post-conflict realities. This deployment, while not a declaration of war, inevitably revived those historical comparisons. For Iran, the surge confirmed a long-held belief that self-reliance and layered deterrence are essential for survival in a hostile strategic environment. Tehran has spent decades building missile arsenals, underground facilities, and asymmetric capabilities precisely because it anticipates scenarios like this. The appearance of stealth fighters near its borders validated that defensive mindset. But Iran also faced a strategic crossroads. A sustained American presence pressures its economy, influences domestic political debate, and complicates regional ambitions. Tehran must balance projecting strength with avoiding escalation that could prove devastating. In this balancing act, Iran's leadership is likely to continue investing in technologies that offset air dominance: advanced air defense systems, longer-range missiles, drones, and cyber capabilities. The deployment also sent ripples through neighboring states. Gulf nations hosting American aircraft gained reassurance, but also increased exposure. Their airspace and bases became more strategically significant, which carries both protection and risk. These countries must carefully manage relations with Washington while maintaining regional diplomacy to prevent being drawn into direct confrontation. Israel, long concerned about Iranian military expansion and nuclear ambitions, watched developments closely. For Israel, the presence of advanced American aircraft in the region enhances deterrence against shared threats. However, it also raises complex questions about coordination, intelligence sharing, and independent action. Regional security calculations are rarely simple. They are layered with historical distrust and shifting alliances. Beyond the immediate region, global powers observed carefully. Russia and China, both increasing their influence in Middle Eastern diplomacy and defense cooperation, assessed the deployment's implications. A strong American military presence reinforces U.S. influence, but may also motivate competitors to deepen partnerships with regional actors seeking strategic alternatives. Great power competition increasingly overlaps with regional rivalries. Energy markets provided another lens into the long-term implications. Even without active conflict, the perception of instability can drive oil price volatility. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most critical maritime choke points in the world. Any sustained tension in its vicinity affects global supply chains and economic confidence. The deployment served as a reminder of how tightly linked military posture and economic stability remain in the Middle East. Technological evolution also emerged as a defining theme. The integration of stealth fighters, surveillance aircraft, refueling tankers, and cyber capabilities highlighted the changing nature of warfare. Future conflicts are unlikely to resemble past wars in simplicity. Instead, they will involve multi-domain operations: air, sea, land, cyber, and space operating simultaneously. The recent surge demonstrated how quickly advanced systems can be positioned to create strategic leverage. But perhaps the most profound implication lies in the realm of deterrence psychology. The crisis revealed that deterrence in the modern era is increasingly about perception management. Military assets are deployed not only to fight, but to communicate. Each aircraft landing at a regional base carries symbolic weight. Each missile test or defensive drill sends a signal. The challenge is ensuring those signals are interpreted correctly. The months following the surge may ultimately define its legacy. If tensions gradually ease through diplomacy, the deployment will be remembered as a successful show of force that prevented escalation. If rivalry intensifies, it may be seen as the beginning of a more permanent strategic standoff. The Middle East has long been a crossroads of global power politics. From Cold War rivalries to post-9/11 interventions, the region has repeatedly served as a stage for broader geopolitical contests. This latest surge fits within that historical arc. It underscores that while technologies change, strategic competition endures. One critical question moving forward is sustainability. Maintaining advanced aircraft far from home bases requires logistics, funding, and political will. Long-term deployments strain personnel and budgets. Policymakers must evaluate whether such presence remains necessary or whether diplomatic breakthroughs can reduce the need for sustained military pressure. Another question involves escalation thresholds. Modern weapon systems operate at speeds and ranges that compress decision-making timelines. A radar contact, a missile detection, or a cyber intrusion can demand immediate response. In such environments, crisis communication channels become vital. Confidence-building measures and back-channel diplomacy can mean the difference between stability and unintended conflict. The broader lesson may be that 21st century deterrence requires integration. Airpower alone cannot secure lasting peace, nor can missile arsenals guarantee immunity. Stability emerges from a blend of credible defense, diplomatic engagement, economic resilience, and regional cooperation. Each element reinforces the others. For audiences watching from afar, the sight of advanced jets streaking across desert skies may evoke dramatic imagery. Yet behind that imagery lies a complex web of strategy and restraint. Leaders on both sides understand the costs of miscalculation. The memory of past conflicts weighs heavily on decision-makers. Even as military assets project strength, political leaders often search quietly for off-ramps. In the end, the largest American air deployment in the Middle East since 2003 may be remembered less for what happened and more for what did not happen. No major battle erupted, no full-scale war unfolded. Instead, the region experienced a tense demonstration of capability, a recalibration of deterrence, and a reminder of how fragile equilibrium can be. The skies eventually grow quieter. Aircraft rotate home, tensions shift to other arenas, but the strategic lessons remain. The balance of power in the Middle East continues to evolve, shaped by technology, alliances, and ambition. This surge was not an isolated event. It was part of a longer narrative of competition and caution. As history moves forward, analysts will likely study this moment as a case example of modern crisis management, how advanced militaries position assets, how adversaries respond, and how global markets react. It illustrates that in today's interconnected world, even the movement of a squadron can carry worldwide implications. The story of the F-22s and F-35s surging into the Middle East is ultimately a story about deterrence in a new era. It is about how power is displayed without being used, how strength can prevent conflict even as it prepares for it, and how fragile the line between peace and confrontation remains. Whether this deployment marks a temporary spike in tension or the beginning of a prolonged strategic shift will depend on choices made in the months and years ahead. What is certain is that the Middle East remains central to global security calculations. The chessboard is still set, the pieces remain in motion, and the world continues to watch, aware that in this region, even the smallest move can echo far beyond its borders.